Selamat siang Pak Dekan. Halo Hilary, how are you? Selamat siang Bapak Ibu
Selamat
semuanya.
siang.
Oh, hello, can you hear me?
Halo. Halo Mas Fajar.
Iya Pak, iya Prof.
Mas Fajar.
Bisa.
Halo. Ya,
Halo,
you hear me?
yes, I can hear you, Prof.
Halo.
Halo, Prof.
Can you
Ali.
start?
Alright.
Ya,
Assalam,
okay. Okay, you may start now.
yes, Prof.
Already 1 p.m.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
I think Hilary is very busy today. Hello.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let's we start this SinnTech webinar 19. So please let me welcoming all the participants. Welcome to the SinnTech webinar 19, the sustainability of coral reef ecosystem. Please let me introduce myself. My name is Al-Fajar Alam, and I am honored to be the master of ceremony for today's event. We have an exciting and informative program lined up for you today, and we hope you will find enjoyable and engaging moments. First of all, I would like to express my respect to the Honorable, the Dean of Faculty of Agriculture, Mr. Gadjah PhD, the head of Department of Fisheries, Professor Alim Isnansution, the Honorable Dr. Hilary Smith, the Honorable Professor Dr. Djumanto, and also the Honorable to all participants in this webinar. To begin this event, please let me invite Mr. Gadjah PhD for the opening speech. Ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in welcoming Mr. Gadjah PhD.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. It is my great pleasure to welcome to this seminar of the sustainable of coral reef ecosystem. I would like to thank to Dr. Hilary. Thank you very much for your coming to this seminar, and also Professor Djumanto as the keynote speaker. Today we gather not only to discuss the beauty and biodiversity of coral reef, but also how to maintain, how to restore the coral reef ecosystem. Coral reef is often referred as the rainforest of the sea. I think it's a very important ecosystem that should be maintained and should be preservation to maintain this coral reef correctly. I think this seminar is very interesting, and I hope the audience can get the new insight how to make the coral reef ecosystem become more sustained. Thank you very much, and happy seminar, and hopefully this seminar will be useful for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gadjah PhD, for your opening speech. Now we will continue to sing the national anthem of Indonesia, the Indonesia Raya. Please. Thank you. And now we will sing the hymn of Gadjah Mada. Thank you. Now we are moving to the main part of this event, the presentation from the speakers. The speakers for SinnTech Webinar 19 today are Dr. Hilary Smith from James Cook University, Australia, and Professor Dr. Djumanto from Department of Fisheries, Universitas Gadjah Mada, who will be presenting about the sustainability of coral reef ecosystem. And then our esteemed moderator today is Mrs. Anis Dwi Jayanti, the lecturer from Department of Fisheries, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Give me a warm welcome to Mrs. Anis Dwi Jayanti to moderating this webinar.
Hello, esteemed guests. Welcome to the SinnTech webinar 19 meetings. Thank you for the Master of Ceremony for the introductions before. And I would like to give a short introduction of myself and also from the honorable guests in this webinar. For the first speaker is Dr. Hilary Smith. Welcome. And I would like to give a short introduction about her research. So Dr. Hilary Smith is a senior research officer at James Cook University, and her research focuses on coral biology, reef ecology, and adaptations to climate change, particularly in the lens of coral reef restorations. And she's also interested in developing low-cost and low-tech reef restorations approaches that can achieve scale through citizen science and community actions. She's also very particularly passionate about developing methods that can translate to remote and developing island nations with limited resources for ecosystem management. More broadly, Hilary's research interests include coral-algal interactions and genomic of coral health and adaptations. She has a developing interest in intersections of citizen science, reef restorations, and low-tech algal-based biomaterials. So to proceed our today's webinar, I would like to invite Dr. Hilary Smith to begin her presentations. Welcome, Hilary.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Thank you so much for having me today and for the warm welcomes from our Master of Ceremonies and the beautiful songs to start off the webinar. And thank you, Anes. It's good to see you and some familiar faces in the crowd. I'm going to share my screen, and you just want to make sure that it can actually work. Let me see. Can you see my screen or can you see all my notes?
We can see both.
You can see both. Okay, let me try
Yep.
again.
Oh, that's a lot of notes.
Let's try again. How about now?
Oh, it's very, very great, very beautiful.
Okay, excellent. All right, I will jump in and get started. So I'm going to share today a little bit about my research, which is on low-tech coral reef restoration. And what my research does is integrates aspects of ecology, so looking at coral recovery, as well as biomaterials and some community benefits through community empowerment. The work I've been doing has been sponsored by a number of different organizations, and some of those logos can be seen at the bottom, and I'd like to acknowledge their great contribution to this research. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you all from Walguru, Kabah and Bindal country here in Australia, and I'd like to acknowledge the elders of those peoples past, present and emerging. So diving right in, I thought I'd start with some basics and just start with what is a coral, so we're all on the same page. So in this image here, I'm showing you a coral reef, a healthy coral reef with lots of coral colonies. And I like to think of a coral, while it is an animal, I like to think of it as an animal, a plant, and a rock all wrapped up in one. And I'll show you why I think that is. So if I zoom in on this coral colony, a coral animal is made up of many, many branches of polyps. So each individual there that looks a bit like a flower is an individual polyp of a coral. Now, the way that the polyps work is that they are related to jellyfish. So those are their tentacles pointing up. So you can imagine a jellyfish flipped upside down, and that's a coral. It's a very simple animal. It has a gastrovascular cavity. Those tentacles have nematocysts. So just like a jellyfish can sting, so can a coral. And a coral can inject its venom into your skin, but we don't feel it because the amount of venom is so small. So highly related to jellyfish, just flipped upside down and with a calcium carbonate skeleton. If I zoom in even further, you can see those tentacles there. And I think the best way to show that a coral is an animal is by showing that it does indeed move. So I'd like to share this little video of baby corals. So these are about 7-day-old corals. When corals are born through broadcast spawning, sperm and eggs fertilize in the water column and then result in little swimming planula larvae. And the larvae can hunt for a place on the reef. They go around tasting for different chemical cues. I'll play it one more time. They taste for chemical cues, and when they find somewhere suitable, they stick themselves down, go through metamorphosis, and start cloning from one polyp to the next. So that forms the coral animal, and it will secrete its calcium carbonate skeleton out the back. Now, if I go back to this image, you can see that those tentacles are filled with polka dots, and those little dots are single-celled algae of the family Symbiodiniaceae. And what's really cool about the coral is that it contains these single-celled dinoflagellates within its tissue, and it gains about 90% of its nutrition through the photosynthesis that those dinoflagellates provide. So while a coral can and does eat, it doesn't always need to, because it can rely on the photosynthesis of its symbiotic partner. So there we have animal, plant, and now what about rock? So coral polyps are only connected at the colony surface. So here is a cross section of a massive colony of the genus Parietes. You can see that the live tissue only takes up about 4 millimeters, and that's fairly thick. Some species can be only 1 millimeter, and everything below that is its skeleton. So that tissue is only a thin surface veneer in most species, and the polyps are interconnected, so they can talk to each other, share resources, they can specialize and collaborate. If you wave your hand over one part of a coral colony, the polyps will pull in on that side, but also on the other side, so they communicate warnings about defense. And if that coral dies, then you would be left with the skeleton left behind, so essentially a rock. So I hope that makes sense. I think they're all three at once. And what's amazing about these animals is that the photosymbiosis between corals and dinoflagellates underlies corals as reef builders. So from these single-celled dinoflagellates that provide photosynthesis, those live inside the coral polyp, which forms clonally through clonal reproduction, a coral colony, and coral colonies build reefs. And other than humans, corals are some of the only animals to produce structures that are visible from space. So really unbelievable animals and really beautiful ecosystems. And they are incredibly important. So coral reefs cover less than 1% of the planet, but they are vital for biodiversity, fisheries, tourism, coastal protection, and drug discovery. Now, this is an old estimate, but as of 2003, it was estimated that corals provide $30 billion per year in net benefits globally. So really, really important ecosystem engineers. But they are also increasingly under threat. So since 1980, it's estimated that 30 to 50% of coral reef cover has been lost, with more recent mass mortality from coral bleaching. Coral bleaching is what you can see here, where that single-celled dinoflagellate gets ejected from the coral tissue. And the coral without that, as I said, it gains about 90% of its nutrition from the dinoflagellate. The coral essentially starts to starve. The coral also derives its color from that dinoflagellate. So without it, it looks white, and that's why we call it coral bleaching. So a bleached coral is still alive, and it can regain its dinoflagellate only if temperatures are reduced. And corals are the foundation species on reefs. So when you lose live corals, you also lose the ecosystem function, biodiversity, and the benefits that they provide. What is causing these losses? So deteriorating environmental conditions are happening around the world. The main leading cause of coral death is ocean temperatures. So as temperatures rise and carbon is taken into our atmosphere, the ocean is the main buffer that takes up that carbon dioxide, and that actually prevents the runaway climate change that we would have without our ocean. But that means the ocean is warming, becoming more acidic, and causing things like massive coral bleaching. Ocean acidification, in addition, can cause reduced skeletal growth, so that calcium carbonate skeleton is compromised when the ocean pH is acidified. In addition, corals are susceptible to disease, and these get worse with environmental stress. Not only are they more likely to spread, but corals are more likely to die from disease when they're also stressed from temperature. And also a range of local stressors interact with these global stressors. So things like pollution, destructive fishing practices, overfishing, and invasive species all have synergisms with ocean temperatures, acidification, and disease. And coral reefs that are close to shore have an additional set of threats. So here on the Great Barrier Reef, this is just a map of my home in Townsville. We have a major port off of our shores, and that is regularly dredged. And dredging has the potential to increase sediment delivery onto reefs, and sediment can cause disease. We also have a large agricultural area within the Great Barrier Reef catchment areas. And this means that fertilizers and nutrients, pesticides, herbicides, all of that runoff can make its way onto the Great Barrier Reef. We also have major flooding events here in Australia. So in our wet season, flood events can cause massive river plumes going out hundreds of kilometers. So here again is an image of Townsville, where I live, and the river just south of here, the Burdekin River, is the second largest river system in Australia. And this image is just a regular wet season river plume. So we get these maybe once a year, the first flush out of the river when the wet season comes, and that can reach up to 100 kilometers offshore. That can decrease salinity and obviously, as you can see, deliver increased sediments and nutrients. So what happens is that while these conditions are quite bad for corals, they're not quite so bad for macroalgae or seaweed. And I'll use those terms interchangeably, macroalgae and seaweed. So when corals die as a result of these combined stressors, seaweeds can very rapidly take over a reefscape. So here I'm showing you a picture of what was once a thriving reef, and a year later, after a mass mortality event, what remained. And once established, seaweed is a very strong competitor against corals. And this can prevent recovery of corals and drastically shift ecosystems away from coral dominance towards seaweed dominance. As seaweed is not universally bad, it does have a wide range of beneficial roles, particularly on coral reefs. It can take up carbon dioxide, provide food for herbivorous fish and habitat for juvenile fish. It can sometimes prevent UV from reaching the seafloor, so provide some shading for corals. But it also has a range of negative effects and negative interactions with corals. When seaweed's present in high abundance, lots of fish will avoid that area due to not being able to see their predator through the dense canopy. Seaweeds can cause microbial changes in surrounding seawater, and that can lead to increased coral disease. And direct contact between corals and seaweed can both reduce coral reproduction through reduced gamete production and settlement and survival of juveniles, as well as directly abrade coral tissues with harmful chemicals. So in general, when there's lots and lots of seaweed around, we think of this as a sign of a degraded reef and that it's a less desirable state. Now, there's a lot of ecological theory about phase shifts, and I'll go through it fairly rapidly, but in mathematical theory, essentially, phase shifts predict that there's one stable state for an ecological community. So in this graph in the top left, that red spot is the stable state of a community, and any perturbations or disturbance that causes the community composition to move away from that red dot will still be forced back to the same state. Now, what's important is that that red dot, or what is considered the stable ecological state, can only be shifted with a change in environmental parameters. So in B, in that panel B, we have some parameters that have shifted. Let's say water quality or sedimentation have caused a change in the environmental vector space in which that ecological community exists. And then you have a new stable state. This is, often termed a phase shift, and to summarize, it's a persistent change in the dominant taxa in response to changed environmental conditions. So in panel A, you might have a phase that's dominated by corals, and in panel B, you might have a phase that's dominated by seaweed. But those two things cannot coexist within the same environmental parameter space. And yeah, so as I said, only one stable state given a set of environmental parameters. So within coral reefs, here's where we can see things like a phase shift where corals die off through major disturbance, and then through high nutrients, macroalgae can establish and prevent, so essentially change the environmental parameters that allow corals to thrive. There is a second explanation, though, and this is called alternate stable states. So here we would expect to find two different stable communities that can exist in the same environmental conditions. So while a phase shift requires a change in environmental conditions, alternate stable states do not. So this is within the same environmental conditions, you could have a coral-dominated state or an algal-dominated state. And if you end up somewhere in that green space, so perturbations away from the coral-dominated state, if you end up in that green, you have an alternate basin of attraction, essentially pulling that ecosystem towards a different state dominated by a new organism. So two or more distinct stable states can exist within a given set of environmental parameters. And so no matter what the mechanism is, whether it's phase shifts or alternate stable states, there's global evidence for seaweeds taking over coral reefs. There's really strong evidence that as corals decline on a global scale, algae is increasing. So this figure is from the Global Coral Reef Monitoring Network in 2020. This will be updated in the next year or so with the next 5 years of data. But essentially, we see global losses of corals and global increases of algae. And so this has prompted a huge explosion of coral reef restoration research. So this is just a small selection of the different types of research that's popping up now in response to the loss of corals and the increase in seaweed. And this is where my work kind of sits, is within coral restoration. But so what is coral restoration? It's a broad collection of activities that are currently happening or could potentially happen in the future. Things like coral gardening, managed breeding, hybridization, relocations. This list will go on for a little bit, so I'll let that unfold. But all of these have the common goals of either preventing exposure, assisting adaptation, or intervening to restore ecosystems where damage has already occurred. But this is a subject of great debate. So on one side, reef restoration is argued to be a waste of resources, arguing that it could never be achieved at a scale large enough to affect change for reefs on a global scale. But on the other side, we've yet to see any strong commitment to climate change mitigation from really any government around the world. So reef restoration is a chance for reef biologists to do something, because we aren't oil companies. We don't have the direct control over stopping climate change, but what we can do is try to help. There's also a lot of benefits to reef restoration, in addition to potential ecological benefits, such as increasing environmental stewardship, social bonding, and there's vast amounts of proof that even trying is beneficial to the human condition. And in addition, there's very few reef restoration approaches where if you try and fail, there are not very many consequences. So there's not really doing any damage by trying and failing. So reef restoration is really taking off around the world. Now it's, I don't want to say that reef restoration is the silver bullet. What is needed is obviously global action on climate mitigation. There's no false understanding for most scientists that reef restoration is going to save the world. What we need is action on greenhouse gas emissions. But reef restoration does fit in with this three-pronged approach where we can mitigate global climate change while we also start to reduce local stressors such as deforestation, stormwater runoff, nutrient and sediment inputs, as well as coming up with new interventions and restorations. And this is really important because even if we stop emitting today, there are reefs that will continue to degrade for decades into the future. Now, we're not going to stop emitting today. So we are running out of time to figure out what works on reefs and develop these interventions before it's too late. So this is where my work comes in. It ties together these themes of reef restoration and seaweed takeovers around the world. So my work essentially looks at, can we remove seaweed as a way to provide corals a chance to bounce back naturally as a form of natural reef restoration by removing the barrier to coral reproduction, growth, and health. It could be possible that that is enough to restore a healthy ecosystem in the current climate state. This is really common in terrestrial systems. You would never embark on a terrestrial, like a forest restoration project without first removing the competitive organism. So essentially, we're just translating that theory of weeding to a marine system. So to look at this, I'll share my experimental design of this experiment here in Townsville. So just off the coast of Townsville is Djumanto, or Magnetic Island. And this is a really interesting place because it has been studied for centuries, essentially. So settlement, Western settlement in Townsville occurred in the 1800s. And the port here, I mentioned previously, has been dredging since the 1880s. So, you know, we don't have a really strong baseline for many reefs because of the advent of scuba diving is fairly new in our history. But what we do have is strong records from Magnetic Island from the 1970s of dredging of the port and the dredge spoil being dumped on the coral reefs at Magnetic Island in this pulse event that caused mass mortality of corals and really rapid proliferation of seaweed. So here's a newspaper article from 1973 showing seaweed washing up on shore that the locals had never seen before. And we do also have some quantitative evidence that that corals have died off. So this is a study from 2020 looking at drivers of coral and macroalgae abundance around the Great Barrier Reef. And this is at my study site at Magnetic Island. And you can see that since 2004, there's an inverse relationship with coral cover and macroalgae cover. So as you lose coral cover, macroalgae cover increases, and that swap has happened and it has persisted. So this makes for Magnetic Island to be, it's a great place to test whether removing seaweed could work as a reef restoration approach. So here is the study design. So on Magnetic Islands, there's 2 bays that are coral reefs, or used to have thriving coral reefs that are now seaweed covered. And we've established 12 experimental plots in each of those bays, so total 24 plots. They're each 5 by 5 meters each. And we have 6 treatment plots and 6 control plots per site. So the treatment plots are subjected to macroalgae removal at least twice yearly. And we've been doing this since 2018, and that's in conjunction with citizen scientists. So what we do is have regular people from the community come and join us on research trips and help remove the seaweed just like you'd weed a garden. And we do that timed with the algal life cycle. So the dominant seaweed here at Magnetic Island is sargassum. And so we pull out the sargassum before it reproduces in about March or April. We try to aim for once in June or July when the seaweed goes through a natural senescence cycle and dies off, and it makes for a very weak hold fast. So we can essentially the root system, we can pull it out a lot easier. And then once right before mass coral spawning. So corals reproduce once per year. It was last week here, and we aim to get that seaweed out right before the corals reproduce to provide open space on the reef for the baby corals to settle. The things that we look at, quite a wide range of different metrics that we look at. We count and measure all of the algal fronds. We monitor the benthic community through photo quadrats and in situ surveys. We count and measure coral juveniles, both in situ and using settlement tiles as a proxy. We count all the fish. We've been doing some genetic work. And in addition, we've been looking at coral bleaching, microscopic community development, algal turfs, sediment deposition, currents and temperature. So lots of different metrics that we're monitoring to get a really good understanding of what happens when you remove seaweed from a coral reef. Now the results are, I'll go through a bunch of them. So since 2018, we've removed over 3 tons of mostly sargassum. So here's in the left image, just one day's haul. That's probably amounts to about 30 kilos. So if you do the math, 3 tons that's a lot of carfuls over the years. And on the right there, you can see some of our citizen scientists joining us. So essentially what we do is we have divers down in the water, pulling the seaweed out, putting it in these bags, and then passing it up to a snorkeler who snorkels that seaweed to a boat where we weigh it and then put it in the back of the car, and currently we dispose of it in compost. Now what you'd expect when you remove seaweed is you get less seaweed. So this graph is showing the % cover of seaweed in the plots. So gray represents control plots where we've not removed seaweed, and green represents removal plots where we have removed seaweed. And you can see that there's some seasonal variation through the years, but in general, from 2019 until 2024, there's been a general decrease in seaweed where we've removed it, which makes a lot of sense. Now, what's interesting is that right here is where we had a cyclone. So we had a Category 3 cyclone hit directly on my study site, and you can see there's a strong decrease in the seaweed % cover in the control plots. So what actually happened is that cyclone ripped out not only the corals, as you'll see in a few minutes, but also all the seaweed and left a really blank slate. So massive reduction in seaweed in early 2024. But after that cyclone passed, you can see there's been rapid proliferation. So even where we've removed the seaweed, it comes in extremely quickly after that space has been freed up. We do find that through the years, the macroalgal biomass that we're removing is reducing. So we're looking at the removal numbers. So this is just chronological order and the kilograms of algae removed. And you can see at the start of the experiment, we were getting about 100 kilos per plot in some cases, but that has reduced. So it's not that, you know, we remove it and it comes back. We remove it, it comes back a little bit, but then it's reducing through time. So this suggests that we don't have to do this forever. At some point, it should get low enough that it can self-maintain a low algal biomass. But what has this done for the corals? So this is a work that was published in 2022, I believe. So here we're in this picture on the right, we're looking at a little baby coral. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but I'm just circling it here. That's the baby coral and its tentacles in the middle. And this is looking at coral settlement, so that early juvenile phase of baby corals. And we found that the number of baby corals was significantly increased where we removed seaweed. So here again, we're looking at control plots in gray and removal in green. And you can see that the number of baby corals is about 3 times greater in the removal plots compared to the controls. And this had a really tight correlation with the algal biomass present at the previous mass spawning event. So here we're looking at algal biomass at the previous spawning compared with coral juveniles, and the less algae, the more corals. More algae, less corals. So a pretty exciting result that getting rid of seaweed really helps baby corals settle and survive. And what you can actually see it on the reef. So this is a few years old now, but you can see a diverse group of corals starting to colonize the areas where seaweed has been removed. There are some variations. So this is just looking at each year, the settlement and survival. And what we found is that it's actually correlated with the bleaching of the previous year. So coral bleaching can reduce the gamete output of parent colonies. And so we're finding that fewer corals settle when there's been a bleaching before coral spawning. So we're still working on this analysis, but just some early results. In terms of coral bleaching, there is some theory that the seaweed canopy can protect corals from bleaching, but we had a mass bleaching event here in 2020, and we found no evidence for that. So here we're looking at the probability of bleaching for 3 different morphologies of coral, so branching, encrusting, and massive, and we found no significant difference in the bleaching probability between control and removal plots. And more than that, we actually found that having algae present prevented the recovery from bleaching. So once a colony was bleached, if it was in a plot with lots of algae, it failed to recover and often died. Oops, sorry, I forgot to bring that one up. So while I was talking about it, so this is looking at, so the recovery post bleaching, and you can see that there's more healthy colonies in the removal plots for all 3 morphologies of coral about 6 months after bleaching. So lots of corals did not recover where seaweed remained. Unfortunately, I'm not a fish biologist, so this is very crude, but just looking at the total number of fish, because we know that some fish utilize macroalgal habitats for their juveniles phases, but also for food. So we wanted to check if removing the seaweed had any negative impacts on fish, and we haven't found any obvious negative impacts on fish so far, but this work is underway with a student from Indonesia, actually, Bambang Hermanto. So he will be progressing that work over the next couple of years in his PhD. For other sessile invertebrates, microscopic community development, we found that there was more rapid colonization of space in removal plots and a greater invertebrate diversity and more crustose coralline algae in places where we'd removed seaweed. Now this is important because crustose coralline algae, which is the pink stuff in this bottom right tile, is often an inducer for coral baby settlement. So that really explains why we're getting more babies where we've removed the seaweed, because it's facilitating that early community development that favors coral growth. This was published just a couple of weeks ago. We also wanted to look at how removing seaweed if it had any impacts on sediment and turf dynamics, which are major predictors for trophic dynamics on coral reefs. So they underpin flow of energy through trophic levels. And so we wanted to make sure that removing the seaweed didn't have any major changes that were affecting fish diet and things that could affect fishable biomass at the end of the day. And here's just one figure showing the net sediment deposition in control and removal plots again through time. And we found that removing the seaweed really had no impact. So it's not going to either fix or exacerbate any of the sediment issues here on this reef. And finally, the most exciting result, at least for me. So here we're looking at the hard coral cover through time. So here you can see the control plots, and that coral cover is used as a metric to, it's essentially a proxy for reef health. So high coral cover, we think of as a healthy reef, and it's a fairly crude measure, but it's what we have. And so the higher the coral cover, the healthier the reef. Here you can see where we have not removed the seaweed, so in control plots, the coral cover has been remarkably consistent through time. So a few ups and downs that just through the years, which are completely natural, but no major changes. Now, if we look at the removal plots, however, you can see a massive increase in coral cover. So from 2019 to the end of 2023, it more than doubled in coral cover. So really rapid increases. Now, this drop is in 2024, as I mentioned, we had a cyclone. And so you can see that the cyclone had a major impact on coral cover, ripping out many of the corals that had settled and grown. But what's exciting is that even though there are significant losses in the removal plots post-cyclone, they still didn't fall below the control plots. So there's an indicator that this method is increasing the resilience and the resistance of the system to severe disturbance. And our last survey, which is the last dot on that graph, was actually just last week. And you can already see that in the removal plots, there's a very, very slight increase. So really hopeful early signs of recovery. We're not even, 6 months out from having the cyclone, and we can already see that removing the seaweed is providing some chance for those corals to come back. Whereas in the control plots where seaweed remains, if anything, it's gone further down since that cyclone. So really exciting results that this is really working for coral reefs. And I hope the photos will come up. Here we go. Yes, so we can actually see this happening on the reef. So at the start of the study, completely dominated in seaweed, and through time you can see we remove it, and this is just tracking 1 square meter of reef through time. By the end of 2023, that reef was completely covered in coral. So massive change in the community, in the benthic community, and really dominated by corals, and very exciting really for seaweed dominated reefs to be coming back to corals. So in summary, between control and removal plots, we had high algal biomass in control, low in removal, not so many coral babies in control, lots in removal. Some potential slight increase in coral cover. That's really up until last year, pre-cyclone. There was just a minor increase, but major increase in coral cover where we've removed seaweed. Fish abundance is equal, but potentially higher in removal plots. Stay tuned for that. Bleaching severity is equal, but bleaching recovery was enhanced by removing seaweed. Turf algae, which I mentioned is a major driver of reef productivity, was equivalent. Sediment deposition equivalent, and resilience to disturbance seems much higher in that removal plot. So in acute disturbance like cyclones, where the seaweed was removed fared a lot better, and the reef is in better condition immediately after that. So what do we have? Do we have evidence for alternate stable states or for phase shifts? Well, I think that what's really exciting is that changing environmental parameters is incredibly challenging. Getting changes to water quality, not only does it take several years for effects to show up, it also requires massive governmental oversight and policy. So the fact that we actually have been able to achieve a massive difference in coral community, in benthic community, without changing environmental parameters, lends really strong support that we have alternate stable states, that you can have coral domination and seaweed domination within the same environmental conditions, and that at least in the current environmental conditions that exist, both of those are possible. So it gives a really strong hope, really, that reefs can still be repaired, even given the progression of climate change up until now. What we don't know is if we are somewhere along that change in environmental parameters. So what we could be having is a phase shift where coral domination will no longer be possible, and we're somewhere along that shift in environmental parameters where both are still possible, but somewhere in the future they may not be. So that's kind of a wait and see scenario. So what does this mean for reefs globally? Well, I want to go back to this figure where hard coral cover is declining and algae cover is increasing. And we expect to see these trends into the future. So we do expect to see on a global scale that hard coral cover will continue to decline and algae will continue to replace corals. And yeah, this is going to happen on a global scale. So I want to talk briefly about other reef restoration techniques that exist. So one of them is coral gardening, where similar to a terrestrial garden, you would take small fragments of corals, and baby or fragmented corals grow a lot faster than adult corals. So the theory behind this is taking lots of little bits, providing them optimal habitat, so pulling them up off the seafloor where there's good water flow, and then eventually planting those fragments back onto the reef. This is low tech, but the success rate is fairly low. There haven't been any reefs so far that have shown ecologically relevant results in terms of shifting communities back towards coral domination. Now, the remaining coral restoration techniques that are in development tend to be very high tech. So here's one that's in development here in Australia. It's called cloud seeding, where you take a big boat and then spray a specialized mist into the air. And that mist is designed to essentially make clouds more dense. And that in turn would potentially help corals by blocking sunlight during periods of intense solar radiation or heat waves. Exciting technology, but expensive, and the carbon footprint is quite large. So you can see that's a pretty big boat. Boats require lots of fossil fuels. So and it also has a spatial scale that's not going to really achieve protection on massive spatial scales. You'd have to target high value reefs for that. Another method is coral aquaculture. So methods are being developed to basically farm corals and then put those fragments back onto the reef. But one of the issues there is that coral husbandry is incredibly difficult. So there's a lot of research going into basic life history strategies of different corals. And even if it is successful, how do you ensure that those corals that you've made in a farming facility are well suited or adapted to real environmental conditions or are free from pests and pathogens from the aquaculture facility? Something else that's being worked on is hybridization between sensitive and tolerant species. But again, this requires in very specialized scientific knowledge and processes. And again, we don't know what the effects of hybridization are quite yet. Often there'll be a trade-off where the hybrid might be more thermally tolerant, but might be more susceptible to disease. Another method uses these floating ponds to capture coral spawn slicks and culture them in situ, so getting rid of the aquaculture facility, just doing it right in the ocean. But this is really subject to good weather, so you can imagine that this would be very challenging in 3-meter waves. And it also has high mortality rates of corals once they have developed in that pond. And relies on technology to pump the corals back onto the reef. So something else that's being trialed is these specialized shapes that settle corals onto them, either through coral aquaculture or through these ponds. And these shapes are designed to protect corals during their early vulnerable life history stages. They're interesting, they're exciting, but currently they rely on very carbon intensive materials and delivery strategies. So again, using large ships that drink fossil fuels to go out to the reef and throw them overboard. So lots and lots of high-tech research and lots of research on methods that will still have a carbon footprint that might be larger than what the benefits are. And I think it's really important also to note that 80% of coral reefs in the world are in developing nations. Now, I challenge you to think of how many of these methods would translate to developing and remote nations where the vast majority of coral reefs exist. These are exciting developments for places like Australia with the financial resources and personnel that can do this, but for many places this is not reality. So that's what makes me really excited about seaweeding. So removing seaweed is really low tech. If you know how to swim and you know how to pull a weed out of a garden, you have all the skills you need. So I think it's really exciting. But how can we achieve scale with this, and where else could it be relevant? One of the really important things with removing seaweed is making sure that the seaweed is not native or not native in that abundance. We don't want to be removing seaweed ecosystems where they are naturally occurring and where they're really important. But unfortunately, as I already mentioned, there's major gaps in quantitative ecology because of the advent of scuba diving in the 1960s, but most reefs had already started to degrade by the 1960s. So this is where traditional ecological knowledge can fill these gaps in historic quantitative ecology. And this is something we've been working on the Great Barrier Reef, working with traditional owners to understand their oral histories and oral traditions around the reef, and some recipes that have been passed down through the years. So it's an interesting way that, you know, through recipes and food and culture, we can find out what used to exist in a place that no longer does. We also need to be aware of shifting baselines. So this is a syndrome where there's a loss in memory or ecological knowledge. So here's an image of what used to be considered a great catch in Key West in 1956. And you can see that fish is larger than that man. But in 2007, here's what's considered a great catch. It's probably about the size of your hand. So remembering is another part of this, and human memory is really unreliable. So these are just two challenges I wanted to highlight in identifying places that could benefit from seaweed removal. But there are actually a lot of places that seaweed removal is not rooted in deep history. It is happening in real time. So here's a map of the world. And one of the classic examples of a shift from coral to algae was in Jamaica in the 1960s and 70s. So here you can see graphs showing coral cover. And through a combination of hurricanes, overfishing, and disease, there were rapid and significant losses in corals, and that classic example of seaweeds replacing those systems. So nearby in Guadeloupe and in Turks and Caicos, they are already removing seaweed of Microdictyon and Dictyota. And so those trials are actively ongoing because that shift has happened in human memory. In French Polynesia, And there's been a rapid takeover of Turbinaria ornata in the main island of Tahiti and nearby Moorea. And Turbinaria is native to those areas, but not in the abundance that it is currently in. And this has also shifted the fish that occurred, resulting in changes in fishermen attitudes and target fisheries. And this has actually resulted in an increase in ciguatera poisoning. So really clear links between coral reef health and human health. In the Cook Islands, it used to be common practice to release sewage directly into the lagoon, and this resulted in overgrowth of Buddleia and Caulerpa. Now the release of sewage has stopped, but the seaweed remains. So this is an area where it could be implemented. In Samoa, there are reefs that have been taken over by cyanobacteria, Valonia, and sargassum, and there's fishermen that are already removing sargassum and burying it on their beaches, and that occurred only over 2 years. In Tuvalu, there's a non-native species of sargassum that established after increased shipping brought it in ballast water. And you can see that reef flat is completely covered in sargassum, and the people there are looking for a solution. In Guam, there are seasonal outbreaks of Chetomorpha, and you can see here that this is completely taken over a coral. And the unfortunate thing about this case is that these seasonal outbreaks coincide with coral spawning. So the 1 or 2 weeks per year where corals reproduce, they are having to fight through seaweed outbreaks. In Raja Ampat in Indonesia, I've been contacted recently by a group that has seen rapid takeovers of the seaweed Halimenia, where it had never been seen before. And even in the Western Indian Ocean off the coast of Africa, there are examples of seaweed taking over. So while you can see that this is a really different problem around the globe, it is a problem around the globe, and it's something that can be addressed. But how do we achieve that buy-in? Well, one way is through education and citizen science. So engaging with people to build environmental attitudes is really powerful at providing people agency to self-manage their reef. So by providing low-tech methods for people to monitor reef changes as well as intervene, there's a really strong chance for local peoples to manage their own reefs. The other way is through proving that seaweed takes up carbon and using this as a carbon credit. This isn't my area of expertise, but seaweed definitely take up carbon. So they take up carbon in their growth season, and then as they senesce, so many species have these natural cycles of senescence, they release all that carbon back into the water and hence the atmosphere. There are some trials on taking seaweed biomass and sinking it to the bottom of the ocean. So I do see some issues with that though, because seaweed floats, so you need something to make it sink. That's likely to be a material like concrete that is highly carbon intensive. The other thing is you need to find an area with ocean deep enough to sink it so that it does stay sequestered. And to do that, you need a boat that drinks fossil fuels. So the carbon footprint of the sinking may not actually provide benefit when you consider how much carbon is taken up by the seaweed. It's an area of active research, and I'm keen to see where it lands, but I do have my doubts. But the other way that you could do it is by capturing that carbon into a stable product, and this is where biomaterials could come in. So this is an image in the Caribbean where massive sargassum strandings occur, and they have a pelagic species of sargassum in the Caribbean. And so it's very different to many places around the world where the seaweed is actually attached to the seafloor. This seaweed reproduces freely floating in the water and then massively strands on their beaches. So terrestrial collection methods are quite easy, and also the biomass is way larger than what we have here in the Pacific. But this means that the research that's being done on this species doesn't necessarily translate here to the Indo-Pacific. But they do have some exciting advances. So here's some bricks that are made out of sargassum. These products do exist, but they currently require industrial infrastructure and high-tech approaches, which are much more available and accessible in places like Mexico. Might not translate to, say, the Pacific Islands. And finally, Caribbean sargassum takes up heavy metals, so that can't be used in compost or edible products, but we don't know if that's the case for our seaweeds here in the Indo-Pacific. So an area of really exciting research could be to look at what the bioaccumulation is of different seaweed species. And one of the issues with creating a biomaterials pathway for seaweed is that we know that through removal of seaweed, that biomass rapidly declines. So you get a variable and unreliable harvest. Within 5 years, it's gone from a mean of about 70 kilos per 25 meters to less than 20. So it would be really important to make a local product that is consumed locally to drive participation in reef stewardship, but not create reliance on a new product value chain. So I want to share a little bit about some biomaterials trials that I've been doing. I'm not a biomaterials person, but this is in association with a good friend of mine who works at Harvard University in the USA. So we sought out to make a seaweed-based biopolymer that is biodegradable, has structural properties, moderate lifetime, and low tech and accessible. So something that could be used in community programs where seaweed are removed for reef restoration and then repurposed into something useful. This is the fabrication process that we tried in our initial pilot stages. So just sun drying the raw material, grinding with blenders and mortar and pestles, different additives that were locally available, boiling on a household stovetop, molding without any electricity, and then drying and monitoring. In the drying stage, there were already challenges highlighted, so lots of impurities within the specimens. We didn't do any kind of washing of the materials, so we left all of the salts in because we want this to be as low tech as possible. There were also different anatomical components within the sample. So we included the leaf, the stem, and the vesicles of the sargassum. And this is something that would be traditionally absent from more industrial processing that would use only one anatomical component of a seaweed. And also, to be honest, it was quite smelly. So yeah, the seaweed does not smell great through this processing, which is certainly a barrier for uptake. For our additives, we considered only things that would be locally available, things like cornstarch, banana fiber, and coconut fiber. And as I mentioned, we just did household cooktop boiling. And then the molds we used were a range of different shapes, and you can see one of the target ones that is that corrugated look. And the idea there would be to eventually make roof tiles. So often corrugated iron is used for roofs. We think that this could be an interesting area to test, particularly in that post-disturbance phase. Say you get a big cyclone, we know that algae proliferate immediately after a cyclone, and you could take it out. But also during a cyclone in lots of remote island areas, significant infrastructure damages can be incurred. So by providing this as a short-term solution for roofing, we think that could be a really powerful way to encourage removal of seaweed to both enhance local livelihoods while enhancing coral reef health. So this was the final product. It was surprisingly stronger than we expected, given it was only a first trial. It resisted breakage, and yeah, it was just with banana fiber, algae, and cornstarch. So it was very low tech and it was labor intensive, so it required a lot of physical labor, but this was a proof of concept that we could actually make a strong biopolymer out of seaweed that has not been produced in an industrial manner. So stay tuned for that. We hope to continue on this work. I'll wrap up here, and I just want to highlight how I think seaweeding can be really helpful for reefs in a threefold way. So through providing ecological benefit to coral reef health, we know that removing seaweed has powerful impacts on reestablishing corals and allowing them to grow and thrive. We also know that we can achieve community benefit through empowerment and provide biomaterials for local livelihoods. And there's some potential for a climate benefit by capturing carbon and locking it in a stable carbon negative biomaterial. So it's possible that through these three different angles, I think makes seaweed removal a really exciting prospect for coral reefs generally, but particularly in the developing world. That's it from me. Thank you so much for listening. And yeah, I'll hand it back over to our moderators.
Thank you so much, Hilary. This is very interesting finding. I cannot imagine that. I want to say simple weeding can increase a lot of opportunities and give a lot of benefits to the environment and also potential economic benefits to the community. But based on your work, I didn't think that actually it is simple, because you have been conducting this for years and the result is very interesting then. All right, before I just take too much time, I will ask for I think I'm going to open some discussions and let the audience, if there are any questions, perhaps 2 questions before we are going to the next sessions. Are there any questions from the audience? Please just raise your hand, I mean the emoticon, or just join into the communications. Oh yeah, you can also put the questions in the chats. Okay, we have one questions here from Jibril. What do you think about the bleaching of coral reefs in the Great Barrier Reef, Australia? What are the main factors that cause the bleaching and what step can be taken? I'm sorry, cannot read that. For both, small steps and larger scale steps. Okay, perhaps that's the questions.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so we on the Great Barrier Reef, we've had 5 bleaching events in the last 8 or 9 years. And prior to that, we'd had very few in decades and potentially even centuries. So it is an emerging issue here. The main factors that cause it is simply climate change. So it's warm water. There's a really strong correlation between the hottest water on the Great Barrier Reef and the worst bleaching. So I don't have it handy, but there are many maps, mostly put out by Professor Terry Hughes, if you wanted to look up his work, that show just pools of hot water that sit on top of the reef. So, and that correlates quite strongly with the worst bleaching and the worst mortality. In terms of what steps can be taken, the most important thing is mitigating our emissions. So we do need government action for that. You know, every little low-tech steps are also important. You know, we can, in our own lives, we can reduce our own carbon footprint. But we really do need global action on climate change for bleaching to be completely eliminated. there are other things that are being examined. So that cloud seeding is one that I shared with the mist that's shot off the back of a boat. There's similar things that are being looked at with, for example, a surface mist. So it's rather than squirting it in the clouds, it's like it's a compound that you put on the sea surface, and it reflects the sunlight back. I think it's very early, only the first pilot has been done. But so that's something. And then in some areas, they're even just putting large shade cloths. So trying to put shading areas over high value reefs to prevent sunlight reaching through and causing bleaching. So the small scale steps are challenging, and the large scale steps are even more challenging. So we need both.
Yeah, I do agree. Climate change is inevitable, but we can choose actions to escalate this worsening things. Are there any questions regarding to this exciting seaweed removal that can actually done also in Indonesia? We don't have that data yet in Indonesia, but you show us that it is emerging case in Raja Ampat. So I hope one of the participants here from Raja Ampat then can collaborate together with you and starting this nice project, I think. So are there any questions? Or while waiting, actually, I do have one question, if it is allowed. Hillary?
Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing is you have been doing this for 4 years to seaweed removals, and you did mention that we don't have to do this all the time, and it at some point, if the ecological health is back, then we don't need to do this. How long do you think in your project sites that the removing of seaweed minimally need to be done?
Great question. I unfortunately don't have the answer, because we had planned actually to, after 5 years, we planned to stop to see if 5 years was enough. So 5 years of removing 2 to 3 times a year, maybe it would be enough and we would just stop. But then the cyclone came. So the cyclone came and the seaweed reestablished, the corals were completely destroyed. One of our sites was way worse than the other. So now we will try again for our 5-year cycle and see if 5 years after the cyclone, if there's enough to stop. So stay tuned. I don't have an answer. I think that it had gotten to a point where it could self-sustain, but unfortunately we didn't get to test that hypothesis.
Of course, we're keen to hear about the progress, because I think these emerging cases happen everywhere, and especially in tropical area. Are there any other questions from the audience here? The biomaterial issues is really interesting, actually, but again, I'm not the expert on this. I do recall that some of our audience is biomaterial expert. So I would just like call if there are any questions.
Hello.
Please. Oh yeah. Mr. Alim, please.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Miss Anes. Thank you, Hilary. How are you? It is nice to meet
Very
you
good to
again
see you,
in this
Professor.
in this seminar. Okay. Thank you for your great presentation. Also, a great research from ecological to be make some kind of economical value of a biomaterial from seaweed. So the most interesting for me is there is some phenomena that there is a takeover of the area from the coral reef to be the seaweed, what kind of seaweed area of growth. Actually, what is the critical factor why the seaweed is very easily to to take over the area of the coral reef. And do you agree that the sargassum is to be the invasive species in the sea? Okay, thank you.
Great question. So what causes the seaweed to take over? I think it
Yeah.
varies site to site. So here at my study site, it's the history is quite complex, but what I've been able to, what I think has happened is that there has been a post-acute disturbance. So in the 1960s, the dredge spoil was dumped directly onto the reefs here, and that killed the corals almost instantly. And once that space was freed up, the seaweed established quickly because it has such a much faster life cycle. Corals have a really slow life cycle. It takes some species tens of years to be big enough to reproduce. And they're really, really slow growing. So some corals only grow 1 millimeter a year. So for them to reestablish, it takes a really long time. You also need to have a breeding population of coral adults to provide babies to reestablish. And if you've lost all of the corals through that acute disturbance, there's no one left to reproduce and repopulate. So I think here it was a matter of that dredge spoil getting dumped, and then more chronic stressors. So once the seaweed's there, it's very hard for the corals to come back. In other places, it's similar but different. So that example in the Caribbean, where it's one of the best documented shifts from coral to seaweed, again, had that acute disturbance of a hurricane coming through and wiping out lots of corals, and then an additional disease outbreak and overfishing of the herbivorous urchins that live in the area. So those urchins were fished to a point that they couldn't control the algal biomass that developed after the hurricane. So it's really complicated. I think it depends site by site. Here where I am, there's a really healthy population of herbivores, but they will not go towards mature seaweed stands. So it's only new growth that they like to eat. And this seaweed here is persistent all year round. It's the new growth is buried within the mature stands. So they don't venture there because they're afraid of predators. Other areas like in Samoa, there was a mass bleaching event. So again, an acute disturbance with a mass die-off of corals, and then a rapid proliferation of seaweed once that space was freed up. So it does seem to be a trend of acute disturbance and seaweed proliferation, and then more chronic processes that maintain that state. But yeah, it varies what that acute disturbance is and what the chronic stresses are. Here also we have lots of nutrients and sediments, but that's absent from many places. Oh, and you said, is it invasive species? So it depends. In Hawaii, there was an invasive species that they did do removal manually, and then they supplemented with herbivore aquaculture. So they bred lots and lots of urchins and released that onto the reef after they removed the seaweed manually, but that was an invasive species. Sargassum is naturally occurring on the Great Barrier Reef, just not in the abundance that it currently occurs in. It's also naturally occurring in the Caribbean, but not in that massive abundance that they get the strandings. So it's natural, but not natural abundance.
All right, Mr. Alim, I've seen that perhaps you want to continue these discussions, but as a moderator, I have to cut these questions. And thank you very much, Hilary, for your nice and great talk. It's opened our knowledge about that there are actually some competitions between the coral reefs and also the seaweed. And by doing the simple act and by removing the seaweed, we can also increase the possibility and protect the balance of the ecosystem of coral reefs, the bounce back. And by removing it also, we can potentially reducing the carbon storage in seaweed and can harvesting it for some biomaterial product, which is really incredible that one act can be a domino effect for other things. So again, thank you so much for your time and your shared knowledge here. We appreciate so much. And I think I have to invite the second speaker here. So for everyone, let's give a big applause to Hillary. Thank you so much for the talk. And while we also have to invite Mr. Djumanto as a second speaker. So Mr. Djumanto is part of Fisheries Department of UGM staff, and he does a lot of research in otolith and stock assessments. So it's apart from the coral reef ecosystem. Now we are moving to the next talk from the expert of coral reef fishes. So Mr. Djumanto, we invite you to give some talks here, and please, time is yours.
Thank you, Mrs. Moderator, for the time. Let me to show my presentation. Okay. Okay, thank you for the time and good afternoon. Let me start. I would like to talk about the role of the marine protected areas in Indonesia. And this is my outline of the presentation. I would like to talk about the introduction, then the roadmap of fishery resources conservation, and then the strategy for the management of fishery resource conservation areas, then utilization of conservation areas, conclusion and recommendations. Let's move on. Yeah, this is the map showing of the Indonesia. Indonesia is an archipelagic nation situated between two countries and ocean, whose incredible marine biodiversity that Indonesia located between Asia and Australia. This is very wonderful places, but the effective climatic change. Yeah. And Indonesia have offer more than 17,000, exactly around 17,504 islands and extensive coastline around 106,000 kilometers of coastline. Indonesia has established marine protected areas to conserve its rich aquatic ecosystem and support coastal communities. Then, this overview examines the development of management strategies and utilization of marine protected area in Indonesia, and highlighting their crucial role in preserving marine life and benefiting local population. That we know, marine protected area have some benefit for local communities. Next, about the unique geography of climate. Indonesia is located between 6 degrees 0.minutes north to 11 degrees 0.5 minutes south, and about 94 degrees to 45 minutes east to 141 degrees 0.1 minutes east is places in the crossroad of mature continent and ocean. This area has ecosystem that very interesting. These two geographical prepositions result in tropical climates influenced by monsoon winds, leading to distinct wet and dry season. The geographic positions is located between Australia and Asia, Indian and Pacific. This a mix with a very beautiful diversity. The Coral Reef is ample sunlight year-round, contributing to its rich biodiversity. That's every day we can get the sunlight, yeah, compared to the mid area. The climate influenced by tropical climate with monsoon wind affecting seasons and biodiversity impact year-round sunlight supporting the diverse ecosystem. Let's move. Okay. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. Next, about the Indonesia has a microdiversity. Yeah. Indonesia is recognized as one of the 17 mega biodiversity countries globally. We have a lot of species. The fish diversity around 4,813 species of fish inhabit Indonesia waters. This belong to Harsono. That this is mixed. Species is very much. Then the coral reef is around 590 species of coral found in Indonesia reefs, and also mangrove variety around 202 mangrove species contribute to coastal ecosystem. And also marine invertebrates around 1,000 of mollusks and crustacean species thrive in these waters. This marine ecosystem is further enriched around by 2,005 mollusk species, around 2,000 crustacean species, and 6 turtle species. In the world, around 7 species of turtle, and 6 of them inhabit in Indonesia, and we can find in Indonesia. Next, about Indonesia's archipelago comprises around 1754 islands with 7,870 named island and around 9,634 unnamed island. This means that a small island in between in the Indonesia archipelago. The countries have 5 largest islands like Sumatra, Kalimantan, Java, Sulawesi, and West Papua, make up around 85.8% of the total land area, with a coastline stretching around 99,093 kilometers and a land area of 1,910,931 square kilometers. This means the wide area. And Indonesia boasts a coast to land ratio around 5.1 meter per square kilometer. Its territorial waters cover around 5,800,000 square kilometer, including 800,000 square kilometer of territorial sea, around 2,300,000 square kilometer of archipelagic seas, and around 2,700,000 square kilometer exclusive economic zone that this we can utilize of the organism in this sea. And in the left side that of the island statistically, the largest island in Sumatra, around 473,000 kilometer, 481. Then Kalimantan around 743,330 square kilometer. Then Java around 128,297 square kilometer. Then Sulawesi around 180,681 square kilometer, and West Papua is around 102,946 square kilometer. And the bottom one is around the coastline marine areas, around 99,000 kilometer, and land area around 1,910,931 square kilometer, and territorial waters around 5,800,000 square kilometer. That this is we will decided the government decided of the marine protected area in Indonesia. Then about the coastal ecosystem and their function, Indonesia's coastal areas feature diverse ecosystem, including mangroves, seagrass, and coral reefs. This ecosystem play crucial role in ecological, biological, economic, and sociological roles. They serve as feeding grounds, spawning areas, and nurseries for aquatic organisms. The recycled organic matter also produce oxygen and provide food source for marine life, machines, industrial raw materials, and tourism opportunities. Socially, they hold cultural and religious significance for local communities. This the religious significance for local communities, for example, equal function, habit for marine life, spawning, and security, and some local people sometimes makes decision to protect this area based on their rules. Then the biological functions, nutrient recycling, oxygen production, food chain support. And about the economic function as food sources, medicinal resources, also tourism opportunities, and this is some area we have tourism uh, tourism tourism places. Then sociological functions about the cultural and religious significance for local communities. Let's move on. The coastal for marine protected area. The increasing demand for resources has led to overexploitation and degradation coastal ecosystem. To combat this, marine protected areas have been established to maintain ecosystem quality and provide opportunities for aquatic biota to grow and reproduce undisturbed. And marine protected areas grew rapidly after 2000s. Marine protected area aims to be source of germplasm and seedling suppliers for buffer zone and utilization areas, ensuring the long-term sustainability for marine resources. Also, about the ecosystem degradation, increasing resource demand leads to overexploitation due to use for human being. MBA established protected areas created to maintain ecosystem quality, also to use for other necessities. The biodiversity recovery, many protected areas provide safe havens for species, growth and reproduction. Sustainable resource management, then marine protected areas serve as sources of germplasm and seedling for surrounding areas. Then about the traditional conservation practice that already done some communities in Indonesia. Several provinces and regions in Indonesia have long-standing conservation practices passed down through the generations. This includes the Panglima Laut in Aceh, then Lubuk Larangan in Sumatra, and Kelong in Batam, Menii in North Sulawesi, Sasi in Maluku, and Papua, also Awik-Awik in Lombok. This traditional protected area is get some benefit. This traditional system regulate fishing activities, especially when fishing, protect marine resources, and often incorporate cultural and spiritual elements. Then about the Panglima Laut in Aceh. Panglima Laut, a traditional institution dating back to the 12th centuries, plays a crucial role in managing fisheries in Aceh. Then it serves as bridge between fishermen and the government, regulating fishing procedures, resolving disputes, and ensuring a sustainable resource management. And the Panglima Laut enforce environmentally friendly fishing practice, prohibit marine environment damage, and establish fishing moratorium on certain days, including regular days. This especially during the big days, for instance, for the Idul Fitri and Idul Adha, for Panglima Laut will protect for fishermen to go to the sea. The conservation measures is enforce eco-friendly practices fishing moratorium. Then about Lubuk Larangan, so a little bit different with Panglima Laut. Lubuk Larangan practice in West Sumatra is form of local wisdom that protects specific rivers areas from fishing activities. That sometimes the local communities make Lubuk Larangan with the religious. Yeah, these protected areas serve as spawning ground for fish, especially for economic species, with fishing prohibited for certain periods to allow fish population to grow and reproduce. Then, for example, in the Sebayang rivers, community has agreed to maintain and preserve the river area, codifying this agreement to customary law. Then the Lubuk Larangan is typically open once a year during the dry season, allowing control fishing using environmentally friendly methods. The protected areas, basic river, actually in certain length of the river section designed as no fishing zone. This. And for the spawning ground, areas allow of undisturbed fish to reproduce then spawning and then the recruitment of the larvae to the fish to the rivers. Then customary laws, the conservation practices codified in local regulation. So the communities in the areas will follow the regulation. Then annual opening, control fishing allowance year during transition, sometime suit with the big days. Then about the growth of marine protected area in Indonesia. The development of marine protected area in Indonesia has seen significant growth, especially in recent decades after the year of 2000. In 1945, when independent in Indonesia, less than 1 million hectares were protected, very limited. Then by 1995, this increased to 2.6 million, 2.6 million hectares across 24 conservation areas that spread out from Sabang to Merauke. The growth accelerated, reaching around 5.5 million hectares in the year 2005 and become 17.3 million hectares by the year 2015 with around 154 conservation areas. And this grows steep very rapidly. As of early 2021, Indonesia marine protected areas cover around 23.34 million hectares, representing around 7.18% of Indonesia waters. Then this is the graph showing the growth of development in Indonesia marine and fishery conservation area in the period between 2000 until 2020. As we saw here that in the year 1945, less than 1 million hectares protected area are built. And in the 1995, around 2.6 million hectares or around 24 conservation areas have developed. Then in 2005, around 5.5 million hectares protected area has developed. Then around 2015, around 17.3 million hectares, and totally 154 conservation areas have developed. And this in 2021, around 23.34 million hectares, around 7.18% of Indonesia waters. At the moment, around 2024, the area of marine protected area around 28,000 million is around 19% of Indonesia waters. And the development of natural resource conservation in Indonesia can be categorized into 4 distinct periods: the era of kingdom, the Dutch colonial period, and the era of independence, and the age of reformation. The kingdom era is traditional practice and local wisdom in conservation. And the Dutch colonial period, introduction of formal conservation laws and reserves. Each period has its unique characteristic and approaches to conservation, reflecting the changing social, political, and environmental context of the time. In the independent era, adoption of colonial conservation laws. Reforming is a modern approach to marine and coastal conservation. Let's move on to the correspondence during the kingdom era. During the kingdom era, conservation efforts were often tied to spiritual belief and local custom. The communities would design certain area haunted or sacred to prevent exploitation. For instance, in the small village or under the big tree, sometimes make sacred, to protect this trees that under this there is a pond that should be protected, the pond and this biota. These areas, often source of drinking waters or ancient relics, were protected by the belief that spirit or supernatural being guarded them. If we talk about the supernatural, the community is something which will think twice to address this big trees on the pond that is sacred to the community. This approach effectively preserves forests, lakes, and other ecosystems by discouraging human disturbance and deforestation. Let's move on about the conservation during, let's move on the Dutch colonial conservation effort. As we know that Indonesia is under the Dutch around 350 years. During the Dutch colonial period, initial exploitation and forests led to significant deforestation and environmental degradation. In the early 19th century, extensive deforestation for colonial infrastructures. Then, recognizing the consequence, the colonial government began implementing conservation measures in the early 19th century. And in the 19th century, as the tablet number 497 and 594, that protect Cibodas nature reserves. And in the 1909, tablet number 497 and 594 were issued to protect animal and plant and the Cibodas nature reserves. Further laws in 1931 and in 1932 established nature reserve and wildlife sanctuaries prohibited the export of protected species. And let's move to the conservation in the post-independent Indonesia. After gaining independence in 1945, Indonesia initially retained that conservation regulation. So some regulation from that still used by the Indonesian government, and some regulation and the law still used. The Ministry of Forestry established the Directorate of Nature Protection and Conservation in 1971 to manage conservation activities. In 1973, Indonesia ratified the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild and Fauna, or CITES. Then a significant milestone was reached in 1990 with the issue of Law number 5, 1990, concerning the conservation of natural resources and their ecosystem, marking Indonesia's first comprehensive conservation law since independence. And but the marine conservation in the Reformation era. The Reformation era, beginning in 1998, saw increased focus on marine resources management. Starting this year, marine protected area grows rapidly. The Department of Marine Affairs and Fisheries was established in 1999, later refining the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries. This period marks a significant shift towards comprehensive marine and coastal resource conservation. From 2000 until 2020, the government issued numerous regulations related to marine and fishery resource conservation, including 5 laws to government regulation and over 20 ministerial level regulation. And institutional development established of dedicated marine affairs department in 1990. Legislative framework issues multiple laws, regulation for marine conservation that this as the base to build up of the marine protective area or the conservation area. The comprehensive approach focus on both marine and coastal resource management. Then regulatory evolution offer 28 types of regulation issued at ministerial at directorial level concerning about the marine and coastal resource conservation. About the key legislation for marine conservation. Several key pieces of legislation form the backbone of Indonesia and marine conservation effort. Let's show you here in the right side that the law or regulation, the law number 31, the year 2004 about the fisheries. Then law number 27, the year 2007 about coastal management. And the government regulation number 60 that issued in 2007, this focus on the fish resource conservation. And regulation about the minister, regulation number 13, 2014, this about the marine protected area network. This include Law the 31 of the 2004 on Fisheries Law number 27 and 2007 on Coastal Area Management and their subsequent amendments. And the government regulation number 60 and of the 2007, especially of the address on the conservation of fish resources. And also ministerial regulation further detail to implementation of marine protected area network, partnership for conservation area management and technical guidance for evaluation the effective of marine conservation areas in Indonesia. Let's above the Indonesia coral triangles. As Indonesia, the position between the Australia and Asia, this is makes the Indonesia is a crucial part of the world's coral triangle, which includes 6 countries: Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Papua New Guinea, Timor-Leste, and Solomon Islands. This region boasts unparalleled marine biodiversity with over 500 coral species, around 3,000 fish species, marine fish species, and around 2,002 mangrove species and 15 seagrass species. Also, Indonesia has coral reef cover more than 5 million hectares, representing 18% of the world's total coral reef and 65% of those in coral triangles. These areas serve as vital spawning, breeding, and feeding ground for economically important fish species like grouper and other fish species. About the coral diversity, as we saw here, around over more than 5,000 species of coral in the coral triangle. As we saw here, we can see that the map in Indonesia coral triangle area and the green shadow, which is part of the world's coral triangle, has more than 5 coral species and more than 3,000 fish species of the subspecies. Fish species, more than 3,000 fish species inhabit these waters. Then about the coral reef health in Indonesia, the health of coral reef is crucial for maintaining marine biodiversity and supporting coastal communities. If the coral reef health is very high, is supposed to be the fish is also very healthy and will get more biomass. Indonesia coral reef health is categorized based on the percentage of live coral cover, called the excellent. It's mean between around 76 until 100% cover, and good around 51 until 75% covers, moderate around 26 until 50% cover, and poor around 0 until 25% covers. And the recent assessment showed that around 6.39% only of Indonesia's coral reef are in excellent condition. So it means that very few. And around 23.4% are good, and around 35.06% are moderate, and around 35.15% are in poor conditions. If we average all, it means that around the coral reef in Indonesia around in moderate condition. This statistic highlight the need for continued conservation effort to improve and maintain coral reef health across the archipelago. And the right side is the summaries of the condition of coral reef. And about mangrove ecosystem in Indonesia, Indonesia boasts extensive mangrove forest covering around 3,310,000 hectares, unevenly distributed across the archipelago. The largest mangrove area are found in Papua, around 45.2%, followed by Sumatra, around 20.1%, and Kalimantan, around 22.2%. That the mangrove play crucial role in coastal protection and carbon sequestrations and providing habitat for diverse marine life. That also ecological important for mangrove is for the habitat for marine life, also the nursery ground for fish, for young species. However, this ecosystem for fish threat from natural disaster, abrasion, and human activities such as conservation, reclamation, and also pollution. Besides that, also the mangrove ecosystem threat from the subsidence of the land, especially in the, we have know in the north coast of Java Island, there's some mangrove ecosystem already destroyed because of the land subsidence. So the conservation efforts are vital to preserve this valuable of coastal forests. Then about the seagrass ecosystem in Indonesia. Seagrass ecosystem play a vital role in Indonesia's marine environment, providing crucial habitat for various aquatic organisms. The health of seagrass bed is categorized based on the coverage. Coverage high around 60 until 100%, then covered medium about 30 until 59.9%, and coverage low around 0 until 29%. And the current assessment indicate that the average seagrass health level of around 41 until 70%, falling in the moderate category. That seagrass areas feel the threat from the both natural factor like waves and storm, human activities such as coastal reclamation and sedimenting, also other factors such as garbage that coming from land, also coming from the sea. Conservation efforts are essential to maintain this important ecosystem. That seagrass has very essential ecosystem because used for the biota, especially for fish species as the nursery ground, also for the spawning ground, some fish species. And about the geographical division of Indonesia marines. The distribution of marine life in Indonesia is influenced by past geological events, resulting in the distinct geographical regions. These regions are delineated by three imaginary lines, like namely Wallace, Weber, and Littdecker. I saw you in the right side of the map that figure of the Weber, Wallace, and Littdecker imaginary lines that separate the flora and fauna that inhabit the islands in western, central, and eastern Indonesia. The Wallace lines separate western and central Indonesia, running between Kalimantan, Sulawesi, and between Bali and Lombok. The Weber line divides central and eastern Indonesia, stretching from the Maluku Islands and to East Nusa Tenggara, while the Littdecker lines mark the boundary between eastern Indonesia and Australia type flora and fauna following the edge of the South Shelf. So in the species between and that habitat in Sulawesi is totally different with fish species with big habitat in the western Indonesia area, for instance, in Kalimantan, Sumatra, or Java. This is very unique, showing distribution of fish species and the diversity of fish species. About the fish resources and conservation needs. Indonesia marine waters hold potential fish resources of around 12.5 million tons per year. Yes, around 12 in the newest data around 12,000.05 million tons per year. However, excessive of an unsustainable fishing practice, for example, catching fish using using some fishing gear that prohibited, particularly in the earlier in the 1990s, led to significant declines in fish stocks. This situation prompts the implemented of Law Number 5 of 1990 concerning the conservation of biological natural resources and their ecosystem. The law aims to protect life support system, preserve biodiversity, and promote sustainable resource use. The conservation efforts are crucial to balance exploitation with resource regeneration, ensuring long-term sustainability of the organism. The Indonesia government, let's move to the strategy for marine resource conservation. The Indonesia government has developed comprehensive strategies to conserve fishery resources and ensure marine protected area benefit wider communities. These strategies include strengthening human resource and integrating fisheries and marine institutions across sector, implementing maximum sustainable management of marine and fishery resources, increasing productivity based on research and scientific approach, and expanding partnership network, including domestic and international markets, as funding sources. This multifaceted approaches aim to balance conservation with sustainable utilization of marine resources. So there's institutional integration, strengthening across sector collaborative fisheries and marine management between one institution to other institution. Also, sustainable management, implementing practices to maximize resources used within sustainable limits. Also, research based on productivity, increasing fishery productivity through scientific approach. So based on some research used as data to use as the distinctive to decide of the potential biomass. The partnership expansion, developing network for funding and support both domestically and international. This will use to support of the strategies for marine resources. Let's about the zoning system in marine protected area. Marine protected area in Indonesia are managed using a zoning system to balance conservation with the sustainable resources use. That's of the conservation. There are some zone. The zone typically includes a core zone for strict protection. A core zone for strict protection allowing only research and education, and sustainable fishery zone permitting control fishing activities and utilization zone for various activities including tourism and other zone needed. The system, like in the right side, that aims to protect critical ecosystem while allowing for the sustainable economic activities that benefit for local communities. So sorry for the, I will speed up because the moderator have let me to showing that the time is limited. Then about the management of ecotourism, the right side showing that figure showing the map of Congot, coast of the special region of Jakarta as location for planting peoples. Mangrove of Pasir Mendit village has finally become a beautiful tourism area, and that mangrove planted by the community in early 2000 became a shelter for mangrove tourism area. And the right P is the community independently planted and care for the mangrove ecosystem that in Yogyakarta actually have no mangrove area that makes the community planted some mangrove species. The community initiative communities plan and maintain mangrove for tourism. The tourism developed mangrove areas become popular ecotourism destination. This is very unique in Yogyakarta, especially in south coast of Yogyakarta. And this is figure showing the number of mangrove tourism area developed by manager of marine conservation area in each province. Let's move on to the benefit for marine protected area. The right side showing the map of Laut Sawu National Marine Protected Area, East Nusa Tenggara Province, that conservation marine conservation area help maintain and improve marine ecosystem. For the economic, tourism and sustainable fishing provide income for local communities. And about the education, marine protected areas serve as city sites for research and environmental education. That's marine protected area shows the fishery stock reaches around 156,000 tons per year, with utilization 65,332 tons per year, around 42%. It means can be increased until 90%. Let's move on to the next. This about the Alor district of East Nusa Tenggara Province, where nearly around 75% of water are marine protected area named Selat Pantar Marine Protected Area. The area around 2076 693.38 hectare that established in 2015, and the fishery potential in Alor district around 715 tons per year, where only 18% has been utilized and can be increased. It means that the marine protected area produce some potential fish species. Later this, but the challenge in marine protected area, first about the district fishing. As we know, there's some district fishing done by some fishermen. Some areas still face from unstable fishing practice like infertility friendly. Then management capacity, many marine protected area like specific management units or sufficient resources. That next about the tourist impact, rapid tourism development can threaten conservation efforts. And on the right side showing the fishermen boat in the Selat Pantar or Alor district that using inventory friendly fishing gear to keep the fish species sustainable. But the community-based conservation SASI system, the right side showing the map of traditional regulation for open and closed fishing practice in Masabang Island within Anambas Marine Protected Area, Rio Island, province, that this marine protected area controlled by local communities. Traditional regulation fishing practice use right in fisheries integrated with formal marine protected area. This positive impact increase fish population and community income also in some areas. Next, but the sustainable tourism in marine protected area, the right side showing map of the Baranusa Kingdom within Selat Pantar and marine protected area in Alor district, East Nusa Tenggara province. That's the has very high potential. A potential, many marine protected areas have untapped potential for responsible marine tourism. Principle, ecotourism, like plastic reduction and supporting local culture are the key role to keep the marine protected area. And challenges, balancing tourism growth with conservation goal remain in difficult. So the solution, carrying capacity studies and sustainable financing mechanism being developed. And this for next about the future marine protected area expansion. The government aims to reach around 32.5 billion hectare of marine protected area by the year 2030, and at the moment around 28 million hectares. The community involvement increased focus on integrated local communities in marine protected areas should be involved to the local communities. And about sustainable use, the balancing conservation with sustainable fisheries and tourism development. And also the future marine protected area challenges is about the capacity building, strengthening management authorities and stakeholder partnership. And this may you always be healthy. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you. I return back to the moderator. Good evening. I stop my share.
Thank you so much, Mr. Djumanto, for your great presentations about the marine protected areas. And we also have the additional information regarding to the historical of protected areas. Before I talk more about the summary of what Mr. Djumanto already presented here, I would like to invite some of the audience if there are any questions regarding to the presentations given. Please, you can raise your hand or just jump into the discussions. Or you can also write it in the chat box. While we're waiting for the questions, if there is any, Mr. Djumanto, so marine protected area is really important as you presented here. And oh, there's a questions about the link absency. Sorry, if is there any from the event organizer here that can share the link of absence if it is required? So continue to the discussions of this. Ministry of Marine Affairs in Indonesia have one of the strategic goals that is imprinted in the websites that increase the marine protected areas during these 5 years time frames. Do you think with our current situations of the the numbers of marine protected areas in Indonesia, it's around, is it 28 million hectares somethings? So how much more is required, Mr. Djumanto, if based on your analysis to give the best services to the environment?
Thank you, Mr. Anis. That's the target of the Ministry of Fisheries is around 32.5 hectares. That means around 10% of the area of Indonesia waters. At the moment, the area that today I read some data that the area of the marine protected area is around 20,000.4 20.4 million hectare. Yeah, it's around 4,000 hectare more is needed until the end of the year of 2030. It's been made around 6 years again we achieve that this is the target for the Ministry of Marine and Fisheries. So it is, I think this can be achieved by the year of 2030 because this is target. So the government is especially the Ministry of Fisheries has tried to increase the marine protected area until the total of around 32.5 million hectares. That's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I would invite perhaps 2 questions from the audience. Please. Is Mr. Marua Naya, I'm sorry, you are muted. Can you just unmute yourself? Is anybody in a all right. Oh, one more questions here. To Mr. Djumanto, seeing that mangrove ecotourism is currently no longer at a great demand and
Yes.
has a problem with the waste, is it still good to continue ecotourism in the future? What do you think about that, Mr. Djumanto?
Okay. Okay, I check the question. I see. Oh, okay. Thank you for the question. I think mangrove ecotourism is because mangrove ecosystem is have many beneficial, even though it likes the garbage, like the what the other uses and also other challenge from the local condition. So I think the mangrove as ecotourism or ecosystem mangrove should be should be increase the area, also increase the their using their utilize of mangrove for other economic beneficial sector for ecotourism, such as fisheries beneficial and others. So this is, I think, visitors, local community should be responsible to develop mangrove ecosystem healthy, because the ecosystem healthy, the community will healthy. Also, we will get the fish more dense, the capture of fish more increase, and other beneficials. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Djumanto, and also to the audience that have questions. I am sorry that I have to close the discussion sessions here because we already ran out of the time. But let's give a big applause to Mr. Djumanto for the time and also for the informations given to us about the marine protected areas, current state, historical, and also the functions. Perhaps if everyone is already filled the forms, can I ask for the committee here to take a picture if we haven't done that yet? Have you done the group picture before?
No, we are going to take a bit after this session.
All right. So I think in our sessions here, let's close the nice discussions. We have the first presenter that discuss about the seaweed competitions and also the coral reefs. And coral reef face a lot of challenges here, and marine protected area is also one of the options to have a healthy ecosystems. And again, let's give a big applause to Mr. Djumanto for the time, and I would like to thank to all the audience here and give the sessions back to the Master of Ceremony. Thank you so much for everyone's attentions, and I'm sorry if there are any wrong words from me. Good to see you, and yeah, hand it back to you, Master of Ceremony.
Okay. Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Anis Dijanti, for guiding the presentation session. And also thank you very much to Dr. Ferry Smith and Prof. Dr. Djumanto for giving us informative and insightful presentations. And in order to express our gratitude to speakers, the committee would like to give a symbolic certificate for the presenter. So I would like to invite the head of Department of Fisheries, Prof. Ali Isnanstio, and the speaker, Prof. Dr. Djumanto, for the certificate giving sessions.
Thank you.
Please for Prof. Ali Isnanstio for the certificate giving session.
Please share your certificate. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Thank you, Prof. Djumanto, for great
Thank
talk in this
you.
afternoon. And please receive this certificate for our appreciation.
Thank
Okay.
you, Prof. Alim. Thank you for all audience. And thank you for moderator, Pak Anes. And
Yes.
Pak Fajar. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much, Prof. Djumanto, and thank you for Prof. Alim. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are already reached on the closing session of this event. So, an additional information for all participants that please don't forget to fill the attendance links because the certificate will be sent to your email. And then before we close these webinar sessions, we would like to take a picture together. So please, for all participants, we invite you to open the camera for photo session. Okay, first we will take a picture on the slide 1. I would like invite the operator for taking the screenshot. Okay, the slide 1 in count on 3. 1, 2, and 3. And then the second slide. 1, 2, and 3. And third slide. 1, 2, and 3. And the last slide. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, thank you everyone. So that concludes our webinar today. We hope you found it enjoyable and insightful. And on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to thank the speaker and all participants for the contributions and your presence. We hope to meet you again on the next webinar sessions. And that's all from me. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Salam.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Selamat siang semuanya.
Selamat siang, Bu.